No, 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 no. Oh, he tried it.
It's the season of giving, so what better way to celebrate than giving our opponent as many free draws as possible? Today we're taking a look at Greed Burn. This is a gimmicky burn stall deck based around the often forgotten continuous trap Greed. While this card is face up on the field, players get punished for drawing cards, taking 500 points of damage in the end phase for each card drawn by a card effect. So our mission is clear: burn our opponent to death by making them draw as many cards as possible. Our first card that helps us accomplish this task is our 3 copies of Destiny Hero Defender. 2700 defense is one hell of a defensive wall, and if it's in face-up defense position during your opponent's standby phase, they're forced to draw an extra card. Somewhat similar is our more offensive option, that being 2 copies of Chainsaw Insect. This time, instead of having high defense, Chainsaw Insect is bringing 2400 attack on a level 4, which is pretty impressive, and when it battles, your opponent has to draw a card. After that, we have 3 copies of Hiro's Shadow Scout. Defender and Chainsaw Insect kind of have uses in other decks, but I'm gonna be completely honest, Shadow Scout is terrible in any context other than a greed deck. This little flip effect monster forces your opponent to draw 3 cards when it's flipped, reveal the cards that they draw, and then discard any spell cards among them. Obviously, the important part is that we're making them draw 3, which means 1500 points of greed burn damage, but also the fact that it discards spell cards can come in handy because you might just sack a heavy storm off the top. For another flip effect monster, we're playing 2 copies of a Cat of Ill Omen. Traps are the lifeblood of this deck. Our win condition is centered around one specific continuous trap, so Cat of Ill Omen lets us search our traps to either get to our win condition or something to protect us while we pull off our win condition. Our last flip effect is Morphing Jar, because obviously it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because greed is 2-sided, meaning that Morphing Jar will deal a massive 2500 damage to your own life points when activated, but it's worth it for not only the consistency on our end, but also the ability to do 2500 to the opponent. Lastly, to finish off the monster count, Marshmallon is here for the obvious stall, and it just happens to give us a little bit of additional burn damage, which is nice. For the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Messenger of Peace and 1 copy of Level Limit Area B. This is just your standard gimmicky stall deck nonsense, and we're going full force into it because we don't want our opponent to play the game, we just want to slowly burn them to death. Then we've got 2 copies of Book of Eclipse. Because it's a quick play, we can use it as a emergency defensive option similar to something like a Waboku, since we can activate it during the battle phase to flip everything down. It can flip down our flip effect monsters, which is quite important when half of our monster lineup is flip effects. But most importantly, during the end phase, your opponent has to flip up all of their face down monsters, and then they get to draw a card for each. To round out the spells, 1 copy of Card Destruction, which is basically just a less risky version of Morphing Jar, 1 Gold Sarc for the generic search, and MST because I felt like we just needed an in case of emergency spell trap removal to deal with problematic cards like Royal Decree. Moving on to the traps, we've already talked about the 3 copies of Greed, but to pair with that, we've also got 3 copies of the Gift of Greed, which does exactly what it sounds like. It just makes your opponent draw 2 cards. Then we've got 2 copies of Disturbance Strategy. This forces your opponent to shuffle their entire hand back into the deck and then redraw that many cards once again. This ties with Card Destruction as having the most potential damage when paired with Greed, but unlike Card Destruction, this just doesn't do anything without Greed face up, hence why we're only running 2 copies. After that, 3 copies of Dark Bribe. It is incredibly important that we protect our back row from things like Heavy Storm, Giant Trunade, MST, and Dark Bribe does that pretty effectively with the bonus of forcing your opponent to draw a card, which just ties in perfectly. I've also got one copy of Fake Trap as a pseudo 4th Dark Bribe. It's not nearly as good since it only protects your trap cards and not your spells, and it also doesn't make your opponent draw a card, but it does a decent job of protecting your back row nonetheless. Another card we're running for protection is 2 copies of Divine Wrath. During testing, I noticed that the Dark Bribes and Fake Trap did a great job of dealing with spell and trap-based removal, but we were having a little bit of a problem with powerful monster effects. Cards like Mobius, for example, were quite frightening, but even more so, repeatable effects like Chiron the Mage and Snipe Hunter presented a huge problem for the deck, so Divine Wrath is our counter for that. Then we've got 1 copy of Magical Cylinder for the potential burn damage, 1 Mirror Force, and 1 Torrential for the obvious board wipes. And then we have Wall of Revealing Light and Gravity Bind to round out our stall cards. Here is an overview of the deck altogether. This is just another one of those trolley stall decks that are very annoying to deal with, but it's even more frustrating because of the fact that it punishes you for drawing cards. The deck itself is surprisingly effective, but it does really struggle with removal, and while we do have quite a few counters for that, any meta deck that just has a bunch of removal is going to be a problem. Regardless though, Greed at the very least presents a very interesting win condition that no other deck really has. Anyways, without further ado, let's jump into some duels. Okay, so first duel, we're up against Aster Phoenix. I open with a bunch of our one-of traps, which is a little bit awkward, but I go ahead and set the Magical Cylinder, Dark Bribe, and Greed, hoping to get the Greed setup going as fast as possible. He attacks our Cataville Omen, and I decide to just let that go through, so that way I can stack Wall of Revealing Light to the top of our deck. Because we already have Greed and we already have Dark Bribe, really the only thing we're missing from this setup is some sort of stall card, and Wall of Revealing Light is perfect for that. Here I go ahead and use the Magic Cylinder to send back this Diamond Dude attack just to get the extra burn, and I figure since we have Wall of Revealing Light, he's probably not going to do much attacking for the rest of the game, so might as well use it while we can. Here we see him flip up a Morphing Jar. I could have chained Greed to get some extra burn damage, but I accidentally hit no. It actually turns out to be a good thing that I did. We'll see why in just a minute. I go ahead and pay 3,000 with Wall of Revealing Light just because I don't want him to get any attacks through. He chains the MST, but I gotta stop that. We want to protect our life points as much as possible. Card Destruction is activated. This time I decide to trade Greed, so that way I can get some burn damage going. He uses Premature Burial, but it's just not strong enough to get past the Wall of Revealing Light. Now we're down to just 2,500 life points. I have to be careful here. I have the Book of Eclipse, which could potentially give us a lot of Greed damage, but if I accidentally reset the Morphing Jar, I'm gonna end up taking myself out. Here in the end phase, he's going to take that damage for using Destiny Draw, so he's only at 2,800. We're getting real close. Disturbance Strategy is going to be really good for helping finish off the game. I flip up Shadow Scout and manage to sack the Heavy Storm off the top, which is super funny. And then I'm able to just swing over the Morphing Jar. Because I'm able to do this, I can then activate the Book of Eclipse, flip down the field, end turn, and sure enough, he's going to draw 4 cards, and that's going to be enough damage to end the game. Next up, we're up against Banner. Now, Banner is a little bit of a troll himself. He likes to play a lot of pretty annoying cards, but we open with a great hand here. Divine Wrath, Dark Bribe, Greed, and Marshmallon. We've got the stall and the protection, just about everything we could ask for. I have to Dark Bribe the Heavy Storm early here, but I'm glad it got it out of the way so that we don't have to worry about it for the rest of the game. He hits into the Marshmallon and takes that 1,000 points of damage, and then I can set up Defender, hoping that he'll attack it, take the damage, and then we can get him to start drawing cards. Sure enough, he does end up attacking into it, flipping it up, but he's got a Mystic Box to take out the Marshmallon, which is quite worrying. Morphing Jar number 2 is one of those trolley cards that Banner, like I said, likes to play. It's a little awkward because it can dismantle our defense here, but I go ahead and flip it up, just to get it out of the way, and we land on a Shadow Scout. He gets a Dice Jar and another Morphing Jar, which is really annoying. He's basically trying to play Empty Jar against us, which is just not something we want to deal with. I attack into the Dice Jar with Chainsaw Insect, and I win the die roll, so he takes 2,500, and he's going to draw a card, meaning he'll take another 500 at the end phase. Things are looking pretty okay. Morphing Jar number 2 gets flipped. I contemplated maybe just negating it, but I decided to just let it rock. He ends up getting a Copycat, probably the worst card in his deck for him to hit off of that. We get a Catavel Omen and a Destiny Hero Defender, so honestly, we made out pretty well from that exchange. Drawing Gold Sarc for turn, I decide to use this to go ahead and banish a Disturbance Strategy, I think is what I end up choosing. I look at the field just to make sure I'm taking stock of what we've got. I do the Disturbance Strategy because I figure that I've already got Catavel Omen to stack a Dark Bribe or something to the top of the deck. Defender is going to defend my life points pretty well, and if we don't kill him within the next 2 turns, Disturbance Strategy is a pretty surefire way to burn him to death. Our cat gets taken out, but really no big deal. We draw the Dark Bribe, which is the important part. Now we've got protection in case he does have an MST or a Giant Trunade or something. He attacks into the Defender for some reason, which is confusing because he knew what it was. But he takes the 1,000 damage. We can make him take another 1,500 here with Shadow Scout. End the turn, he's going to take that burn damage with Greed, and we've got the game in the bag from here. I decide to activate the Disturbance Strategy early, just to make sure 100% that we've secured the victory. He's going to also draw a card off of Defender there, so he's going to take quite a bit of damage here at the end phase. I try to use Gravity Bind. Sure enough, he has the MST, but there's really no point in negating it at this point. The game is already over. A desperate last attempt, he Morphing Jars again for 5, and he's going to basically flip through his entire deck, which is ridiculous. He almost decks himself out. And the creature swap here is completely pointless, so I just decided to let it go through, and sure enough, the 4K comes through in the end phase. Duel number 3, we're up against Jesse. I decide to just set the Catavel Omen and my trap cards and go ahead and pass it back to him, hoping that we can stack Greed to the top of our deck, which is going to happen here when he reveals it with these swords. We can grab Greed, so that way we can get things going already pretty early on. Going into turn 3, I go ahead and just set everything up. Unfortunately, we don't have any protection for the level limit area B because Fake Trap can only protect our traps, but it's no big deal. He summons the Emerald Tortoise, which can swing underneath level limit area B because it's level 3, but I decide to send that attack back for no other real reason than just because I can, and I figure it's going to be one of my few opportunities to use Magical Cylinder this game. We get the damage, and we can burn him with a little bit for Greed with that Gift of Greed. Hero Shadow Scout's going to put in another 1,500 here and sack that MST out of his hand, which is nice. In the battle phase, Book of Eclipse comes in super handy. Not only am I able to prevent him from destroying my monster, but this is going to force him to draw a couple cards in the end phase and allow us to reuse both of our flip effects, which is super nice. The cat is going to allow us to stack a Dark Bribe to the top, so that way I can have protection going into next turn. Shadow Scout is going to make him take another 1,500, and we've got the Torrential as defense in case things go wrong. Our cat gets taken out here, no big deal. We've already got more than enough value out of it since we got to activate that effect twice. We draw the Dark Bribe for turn, and now we've got plenty of protection. We can just sit on this board. He summons another Sapphire Pegasus, and I decide to just nuke the board for the hell of it because we can, and it's going to clog up his back row. Chainsaw Insect doesn't really do much. If we weren't under level limit, we could potentially swing for game, but it's really no big deal. I just put it down so that way we have something on the board. Rare value is going to clear up those spell trap zones, but he is using a draw effect, so he's going to be punished for it in the end phase, of course. And for turn, we draw a Gift of Greed, so I set that down. That's another 1,000 points of damage. We just are going to need 500 more after this turn to finish the game. Messenger of Peace is an okay backup option, but it's not going to win us the game here. Really, we just need him to attack into Chainsaw Insect, or he can activate a spell that I can go ahead and negate with Dark Bribe. This is a little bit risky because he could have had spell trap removal afterwards, but I figured he probably didn't. I negated it just to get the draw because I figured Amethyst Cat would attack directly, but he ends up attacking Chainsaw Insect anyways and going down. Anyways, that'll do it for our look at the Greed deck. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a comment down below if you have a deck you would like to see me talk about next time, and make sure you subscribe for more Tag Force content. I've got plenty more stuff on the way, some videos that won't be deck profiles. I've got a few ideas that I'm going to play around with, but I'll see you guys again soon.